In the frozen heart of Siberia, where winter winds cut like razors and summer brings only brief respite, stood one of the Soviet Union's most elite military facilities. The year was 1968, a time when the Cold War divided the world into opposing ideologies, when military supremacy meant survival, and when the communist bloc gathered its finest warriors to demonstrate the superiority of socialist military doctrine. The Vladivostok training complex sprawled across thousands of acres of harsh terrain, forests, mountains, and obstacle courses designed to break even the strongest soldiers. Today, it hosted something unprecedented, an international combined arms exercise drawing personnel from across the Soviet Union, Eastern European Warsaw Pact nations, and allied Southeast Asian countries. The main auditorium fell into expectant silence. Row upon row of military officers, Russians, Poles, East Germans, Czechs, Cubans, Vietnamese, and representatives from other allied nations, sat at rigid attention. The austere room reflected Soviet military philosophy, functional, unadorned, focused entirely on purpose rather than comfort. At the center of an elevated panel sat Colonel Viktor Petrov. At 48 years old, Petrov represented everything the Soviet military machine aimed to produce. His posture was ramrod straight despite decades of combat operations. His uniform bore ribbons and medals earned through 3 major conflicts spanning 20 years. His eyes, cold and penetrating, scanned the assembled officers with the calculating precision of a man who had survived countless life-or-death decisions. Petrov's record spoke for itself. Over 200 combat operations with a success rate that Western intelligence agencies studied with grudging respect. 15 years commanding elite reconnaissance units. Hundreds of Special Forces operatives personally trained by his methods, now serving across Soviet military intelligence divisions from East Berlin to Hanoi. His tactical innovations were taught in military academies throughout the Eastern Bloc. His physical conditioning programs, brutal regimens that pushed human endurance to its limits, had become standard training protocols. His leadership style was uncompromising. He demanded absolute excellence and accepted nothing less than total commitment from those under his command. Beside Petrov sat Major Dmitry Volov, his trusted second-in-command for 12 years. Volov was leaner, younger, but equally hardened by combat experience. Where Petrov was the strategic genius, Volov excelled at tactical implementation, the perfect complement to his commander's vision. The other panelists represented the international dimension of communist military cooperation. Colonel Jan Kowalski from Poland, whose Special Forces unit had earned commendations during joint Warsaw Pact exercises in the Carpathian Mountains. His expertise in mountain warfare and rapid deployment tactics had proven invaluable during border security operations. Major Klaus Schneider from East Germany, an intelligence officer whose counterinsurgency methods were being implemented across Soviet-aligned nations. His techniques for infiltrating and neutralizing resistance movements had been particularly effective in suppressing anti-communist elements. Captain Luis Hernandez from Cuba, recently returned from successful operations supporting communist movements in Latin America and Africa. His experience in guerrilla warfare and revolutionary tactics brought a different perspective to conventional Soviet military doctrine. Among the audience of assembled military observers sat a figure who stood out despite his efforts to remain unnoticed, Sergeant Miguel Reyes of the Philippine Army. In his late 20s, Reyes possessed the lean, weathered appearance of someone who had spent years in harsh conditions. His hands bore the calluses of a soldier who knew weapons, ropes, and jungle survival. His observant expression, cultural contrast, period accurate, photorealistic. His Philippine Army uniform, with its distinctive red, blue, yellow, and white colors representing the national flag, created a stark visual contrast among the predominantly olive drab and brown Soviet-style military dress surrounding him. Reyes was not here by accident. The Philippines maintained complex relationships during the Cold War era, officially aligned with the United States through mutual defense treaties, yet seeking to understand all military doctrines that might affect Southeast Asian security. His presence represented his nation's pragmatic approach to military intelligence. Learn from everyone, commit to no one's ideology, protect Filipino interests above all. When the moderator, a stern Soviet colonel with administrative responsibilities, opened the floor for questions, the Filipino military attaché who had accompanied Reyes stood respectfully. "Colonel Petrov," he began in careful Russian, his accent marking him as a foreigner but his words chosen with diplomatic precision. "Your reputation precedes you throughout military circles worldwide. Your methods are studied, your tactics analyzed, your success rate enviable." Petrov's expression remained neutral, revealing nothing. "I have a question that many of us have wondered about," the attaché continued. "In all your operations, across all theaters of combat, leading elite soldiers through the most challenging conditions imaginable, have you ever encountered an obstacle you could not overcome? A situation where despite your training, your experience, your formidable capabilities, you failed?" A subtle tension rippled through the auditorium. This was not the typical deferential question posed to decorated Soviet officers. It challenged the narrative of invincibility that surrounded Petrov's legend. For a long moment, Petrov said nothing. His cold eyes studied the Filipino attaché, assessing intention and character with the same precision he had once used to identify enemy positions. Then, unexpectedly, something changed in his expression. Not weakness, never that, but a flicker of memory that seemed to reach back across years. "Yes," Petrov said finally, his voice carrying clearly through the silent auditorium. "There was one time." He paused, and those who knew him well recognized this as significant. Petrov was not given to unnecessary storytelling or emotional reminiscence. "It was 1954, he continued. "I was younger then, though already a captain commanding a reconnaissance unit. We were conducting joint operations in Southeast Asia, providing advisory support and tactical training to Allied communist movements engaged in liberation struggles." The audience leaned forward imperceptibly. This was unexpected territory. "Our mission was intelligence gathering in hostile territory. We operated in small teams, living off the land, avoiding enemy patrols, collecting information on enemy movements and capabilities. Standard reconnaissance doctrine: move silently, observe carefully, report accurately, never engage unless absolutely necessary. The terrain was dense jungle," Petrov continued, his voice taking on a quality of grudging respect. "Nothing like Siberian forests or European woodlands. The humidity was crushing, the heat constant, the vegetation so thick that visibility rarely exceeded 10 meters. Every step risked noise that could betray our position. Every breath felt like inhaling water. We were deep in territory controlled by forces hostile to communist objectives. Our intelligence suggested minimal enemy presence in the sector we were assigned, primarily local militia with limited training and equipment. An easy insertion, quick reconnaissance, swift extraction. Routine." Petrov's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "On our third day, we encountered a local scout. A single man, young, operating alone in the jungle." Sergeant Reyes felt a chill despite the warm auditorium. "By all tactical logic, this should have been a non-event," Petrov said. "One enemy scout versus an elite Soviet reconnaissance team of 8 highly trained operatives. We had every advantage: numbers, training, equipment, experience, tactical doctrine refined through years of combat operations. We attempted to capture him for intelligence purposes, standard operating procedure. He evaded us. We pursued, confident in our superior tracking skills and forest craft. He disappeared into terrain he knew intimately, terrain that to us was alien and hostile." Petrov's fingers drummed once on the table, the only sign of emotion. "For 3 days, that single enemy scout led us through the jungle. He moved like a ghost, leaving trails that vanished, creating false tracks that wasted our time and energy. He used the environment as a weapon, leading us through swamps that slowed our movement, across streams that erased our scent, through dense undergrowth that forced us to make noise. He knew we were hunters, so he became the prey that controls the hunt. He understood we had to pursue quietly to avoid alerting other enemy forces, so he made sure our pursuit was never quiet, forcing us to move through terrain that created sound despite our best efforts. On the 4th day, we broke off pursuit. We had lost too much time, expended too much energy, compromised our mission objectives. That enemy scout, alone, with inferior equipment, without formal military training, had defeated an elite Soviet reconnaissance team not through direct confrontation but through perfect understanding of his environment and absolute mastery of jungle warfare. The auditorium remained absolutely silent. I learned something that day that no Soviet military academy had taught me, Petrov said, his voice carrying a weight of hard-won wisdom. Superior training and equipment mean nothing if you fight on ground your enemy knows better than you do. Tactical doctrine becomes irrelevant when your opponent refuses to engage on your terms. Numbers and firepower are useless advantages if you cannot bring them to bear. He looked directly at the Filipino attaché. That enemy scout taught me respect for indigenous knowledge, for local expertise, for the warrior who fights to protect his homeland on familiar ground. It is a lesson I have never forgotten, and one I have incorporated into every operation I have commanded since. The briefing continued, but something had shifted. The legend of Viktor Petrov had not diminished. If anything, it had deepened. His willingness to acknowledge failure, to learn from defeat, to respect an enemy who had bested him spoke to a wisdom that transcended mere tactical skill. As the session concluded, Sergeant Miguel Reyes caught Major Vulov studying him with new interest. In that moment, both men understood the unspoken truth. The Filipino scout Petrov had described might have been wearing a different uniform, serving a different cause, but his skills, jungle craft, terrain mastery, tactical patience, were the same skills that Filipino scouts had honed for generations in the archipelago's dense forests and mountain ranges. The Cold War had divided the world into opposing camps, but some truths transcended ideology. The warrior who knows his ground, who fights with wisdom born of his homeland, who moves with the jungle rather than against it. That warrior possesses advantages that no military academy can teach and no foreign doctrine can overcome.